Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We are now into a very important topic for discussion. What is the path to progress in the perception of Brahman? Even though Brahman is not something which is perceivable, it has to be realized and experienced. Now, two strong schools of thought are having an impact in the modern times. One school says doing bhakti and performing your regular activities as a karma yogi will fetch you the status of a Brahmanhood. There is a second school which says don't worry about karmas. You don't have to do karmas. Brahman is all about jnana. So get into the study, do dhyana, do read jnana, get into the pursuit of concentration. You don't have to do any karmas. You will still attain Brahmanhood. Vedic Vedanta doesn't agree with both. And chapter 7 deals with this with focus. It makes two conclusions very clear. Bhakti and Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga will do Chitta Shuddhi. It will prepare ourselves for the journey towards Brahman. And they are indispensable. Indispensable. But they themselves cannot fetch Brahmanhood. Once we attain the status of Chitta Shuddhi, upon a guidance of a Guru, we take to the marga of Dhyana and Jnana and thereby realize Brahman. So both steps are indispensable. One cannot happen without the other. Now, coming to the path, Vedanta explains it beautifully with an illustration. If you want to see a pot, you need two aspects. A pair of eyes to see, and light should fall on the pot. Only then we can see the pot. On the other hand, you want to see a light. You just need a pair of eyes to look at it. You don't need one more light which will have to throw light onto that light. It's enough if you have a pair of eyes. Take the example of the reflecting sun. A room is dark. You need a mirror which will reflect the rays of sun so that darkness in the room is dispelled with and it is filled with light. But you want to see sun rays. You don't need a mirror because you can see the sun rays yourself. Therefore, Vedanta says you don't need the reflecting self or the changing self or what you call it, the jiva. In as that reflecting self to be a tool to realize Brahman. Because it's like a mirror. It will always merge with Brahman once it is realized. So what the tool that is required, the indispensable tool is the mind. How strong and firm your mind is towards this journey, that strong and fast one would travel into this journey. It's all finally a mind game. And why do they say so? They say because of millions and millions of births we had taken earlier, we are habituated so much about the following. We believe universe is truth. And we believe, starting from the body to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, up to intellect, buddhi, prana, mano, our mind, everything, we confuse that to be the real Brahman or self, and he is the doer or the enjoyer. We are so habituated. Therefore, Vedanta says this notion, misconception has to be got rid of. And the first step one has to take, the indispensable step, is worship. Unless we worship Brahman in a qualified form, We are so used to names and forms. Therefore, Vedanta says use the same path, spell out the names or the divine names of God and goddesses. Worship the divine forms which pleases you as Ishta Devata, Kula Devata, Grama Devata. So, all these forms, all these names are only to train the mind first with to understand qualified Brahman. These forms are given only for our convenience. Therefore, the thought that somebody can dispense Vedic karmas, Vedic injunctions, Vedic prescriptions, leading a life of dharma as prescribed, you can't say I lead a good life, I don't hurt people, I am noble. That's not sufficient. Because mind has to, because by being noble, you are going to still identify with names and forms. The idea is to get rid of it. And the starting point is chant the name of the Lord and keep worshipping the form of the Lord. So, Vedic injunctions, Vedic prescriptions are indispensable. They say worship on qualified Brahman leads to concentration. It can start from lowest to the highest, it doesn't materially matter. Till the mind is capable of concentration, one cannot give up Vedic rituals and karmas. Upon the mind becoming concentrated, so what should be the status of the mind? What sort of a mind we should have if we have to pursue the path of Brahmanhood? A mind which can think only of Brahman. A mind which can talk only of Brahman. And a mind which is capable of receiving instructions and guidance from a guru only about Brahman. And being bent upon knowing and realizing only about Brahman. Unless our mind is so purified, so firm, so steady and so strong to do these things, till such time we cannot give up Vedic injunctions and Vedic karmas. Now it says once you get into this platform of concentration, learn the Upanishads. Get convinced. Every Upanishad talks only about the same truth, which is Brahman. Hear about Vedanta. See, we can listen now. It will get into our mind as shrewd intellectuals. But for it to translate into progress, we need to be devoted to worship in forms and with names. This step is indispensable, and this step will gradually take our mind to this focus. And what sort of a focus? We cannot be thinking anything other than, which is a 180-degree U-turn. As we are so used with universe, so used with our body, the mind will be so trained by chanting names and worshipping forms and performing the injunctions as prescribed by the Vedas. We attain the Chitta Shuddhi. By performing Karma Yoga, we attain the Chitta Shuddhi. Giving up, do every action for the sake of God without expecting the result. Do all this, it will take you to a stage where the mind, instead of looking at the world, instead of demanding senses to enjoy more, bring in more perceptions of enjoyment, of pleasure, it will start to think only about Brahman. Let's see tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. What is wrong conception? When we forget to think or think incorrectly or falsely, then it becomes a wrong conception. What according to Vedanta is wrong conception? Only two things. Treating the body and the other sheets as self and treating this universal world as true. And this has to be therefore negated through contemplation, is what we saw yesterday. First start with rituals and then end up finally ensure the mind becomes so firm and steady that it can think about only Brahman and nothing else. Now, a question is raised. All right, you want us to contemplate. Should we contemplate in the manner in which normally somebody performs japa or mantra? Or should we contemplate in the way that we normally meditate about holding a particular divine image in our mind? Or is there a third way? Vedanta clarifies when it comes to japa or mantra or form of worship, these are all bound by rules and procedures, and one necessarily have to follow it for one to get the pala. If you want to enjoy the fruits of your prayer, you cannot do prayer the way you want. Therefore, these are all bound by rules and procedures. Whereas in the case of contemplation of Brahman, it is like a hungry man who needs to eat. For him or her, there are no rules or procedures. The only objective is to ensure the hunger is satiated and the thirst is quenched. Contemplating on the Brahman is of this category. There must be a hunger and a need to satiate. That should be the level in which the mind should be prepared, for which, of course, the anterior steps of praying with form, praying with a qualified Brahman and doing japa, mantra, all the procedures as prescribed by the Vedas and the injunctions that one has to follow. But once you come to this position, then contemplation towards the Brahman is of the third category. And what did it mean? What does it mean? We saw yesterday. Think about it, talk about it, getting guidance about it. And the only aim in life is to achieve that. That should be the level of contemplation one has. Now, why do they say that the mind should be so firm and steady? Vedanta gives 3 examples. Mind by per se is unstable, and to control the mind, bring it to a framework of contemplation, and to only meditate about Brahman and nothing else is highly impossible. And Vedanta gives 3 examples which looks easy. Drinking up of the whole ocean, uprooting the Meru mountain, and even eating fire may be possible, but not controlling one's mind. In fact, it quotes Bhagavad Gita's important verse where Krishna says, mind is always wandering, very powerful, very strong, and very hard. Controlling the mind is as difficult as one controlling the wind. So these 4 examples should lay emphasis on the fact that controlling the mind is not easy. And therefore, to reach this state of steadiness, go back to form worship, go back to japa, and it says, read itikasas, read Puranas, read, see, the choice is between the two. Keep on working your way without dedicating the work. And we interact a lot, we speak a lot, we watch a lot in modern days, television and our phones or WhatsApp, internet. We are all distracted all the while. And there is a difference between forgetting Brahman and ignoring Brahman, or not contemplating towards it. Forgetting is pardonable because you need to train your mind slowly. Ignoring is when you have the ability to do, you don't do it. That's unpardonable. And three, when you conceive Brahman as not to be true, then this life is a waste. Therefore, somebody who has acquired the competence should not waste it. Somebody who is to acquire the competence should necessarily focus on the competence, in gaining that competence. And therefore, the general theory, be noble, be good, whatever we do, we are nice to those people, we treat everybody nice. All this is fundamental. You can't ill-treat people and then contemplate on God. Nothing good will happen to you. But merely because you do this, do not think that it's the be-all or the end-all. If mind has to move to a stronger phase, then we should activate our mind, promote our mind, encourage our mind, induce it to reach that level of steadiness where it can contemplate. And Vedanta also describes, once you get into that contemplating frame, think about Brahman and nothing else, you can do your routine works. See, the difference between somebody who is in that frame of mind and doing the regular routine, and somebody who is not in that frame of mind and doing the regular routine, there are a lot of differences, especially two. One who is contemplating and has acquired a good amount of efficiency in that, or one who is a realized soul, continues to do the work as prarabdha demands, will remain fearless and courageous. Whereas one who does it with ignorance will always suffer for want of courage and would lead the life completely driven by fear. This is one significant benefit one has if they go and reach the status of a contemplative soul. Now, secondly, the biggest difference between one who is journeying in the road of contemplation and one who is ignorant of it is both have to tread. See, one thing is clear, this body will leave us only when it is destined. But one who is in the contemplating frame will not get tired because they know somewhere that the destination is around. And it is something which we are going to reach at some point of time. For us, for a ignorant, he or she keeps wandering. And the journey becomes endless. It becomes cyclic and it is subject to pain and pleasure. And therefore, life actually is run with a lot of fatigue. The difference between a contemplating mind and a non-contemplating mind is fearlessness, courage, an absence of fatigue. Let's continue tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The next topic that is sought to be dealt is desire. What will happen to desires which are so persistent amongst the jivas if somebody takes to the path of Vedanta? Vedanta first wants us to capture conceptually the downside of desires. All of us know desires can bring enjoyment, it can bring sorrow, all that we know. But there are a few elements which should get mapped into our thought process is what Vedanta suggests. These are the difficulties which each one of us confront in getting our desires fulfilled. One, securing it with great difficulty. Two, safeguarding it. 3. The sorrow that arises if it is lost. The pain that arises if it is spent and cannot be regained. And the wholesome trouble it creates in the process of its acquisition, its use, and the possible enjoyment. It wants us to map these basic concepts into our mind. They should first get into our, we should believe it so. If we don't believe, then we will be a non-starter. Desires, any desire has these downsides. And the second important concepts which they want us to believe and be convinced of is desires only multiply. They neither divide nor dissolve. The more you enjoy something, the sense organs will try to feel and demand more. Give the vibrations or pulses to the mind, and the mind will be more agitated and activated to go in that process and drive the organs of action to implement. So, more desires leads to more and more desires and not less and less desires. So, these are two basic factors which we must remember if we have to pursue the path of Vedanta to get rid of desires. Now, after mapping these two, they suggest the following. Go back to the same principle. Body is not self and the universe is not true. Because it is only these two elements which interact upon each other and springs out a desires in us. Therefore, what they are suggesting at the first stage is, how do you remain unattached? Can you feel unattached to desires? And the first suggestion they give is how to get into the mode of unattachment. If we believe universe is not true and body is not the self, the desires which we confront will only be seemingly true and not actually true. This is the foundational steps which Vedanta advises us to take. Because you see, it's not that you read today and tomorrow you wipe out all the desires, like with a piece of cloth you wipe out everything on a blackboard. It's not so. It's not that simple. Mind cannot be whitewashed that quickly. So the suggestion is, if you believe this universe is not true and the body to be not the self, it will lead you to think that whatever happens is just seeming and not true. The next stage they say is, this will slowly lead to reluctance. See, they say, whatever is your prarabdha, it will operate, and therefore we will continue to operate in this world, interact in the world, acquire more and more desires. All this will happen. It's not that you can stop it overnight, but apply the brake of reluctance. It guides us to say, you have to enjoy it without a doubt, because that's the destiny in which we have to carve our way out. Now, as we progress, introduce the element of reluctance to whatever desires you want to enjoy or you keep enjoying as of now. Now, this reluctance is not the sorrow type reluctance, which samsara brings. Vedanta brings out a difference between reluctance and sorrow. Samsara is always sorrowful because it's a mixed bag, and before we gain something, we will lose something. Before we lose something, we may get something else, but it will take us hither and thither. That's the nature of samsara. But enjoying a desire with reluctance leads us to two more paths, makes us to progress further in the path with two more elements added to it. One, this sort of a reluctance leads slowly to dispassion. We become, the more reluctant we are in enjoying a desire, the more and slowly we will become dispassionate. So, this seeming reluctance, dispassion leads to discrimination resulting in unattachment. These are the steps which they advise us to follow. Something looks seeming, not real. And therefore, even if you wish to enjoy it with reluctance. It leads you to dispassion. Passion leads you to discrimination. And discrimination leads you to detachment. And what sort of a detachment can it bring? When somebody is very hungry, just to satiate their hunger, if somebody offers food with poison, will he or she eat? They'll say, we'll rather die rather than eating this poisonous food and then die. So, this is the aversion we should have over our desires. And this aversion is not impossible. It takes a lot of time, but it starts from the mind and leads into physical practice. That's why they say first to conceive the basic truth. Whatever steps we need to take, these two truths should always travel with us. Universe is not true and body is not self. Then the rest of the 5 stages follow. So this is the first step, or the essential step which they try to educate us in the path of desires. Now the question arises, all right, what would happen if prarabdha is so forceful and it pours out our karmas over us and allows us to take our path in a particular way which is destined? It is so strong and powerful. How do we deal with such desires? Let's see tomorrow.